Hello, everybody. I'm Mel Hauser. I use she, they pronouns. I'm Executive Director of All Brains Belong. Welcome to Brain Club. Share screen, get us oriented to our conversation. We are back with When Work Dysregulates You, Part 2. Last week, we heard from a panel of community members talking about what workplaces can often feel like. And we're going to continue that conversation today with an asynchronous conversation with neuroaffirming workplace advocate and disability rights attorney Annie Crow. Before we hear from Annie, some logistics. Closed captions are enabled. You just have to turn them on if you'd like to use them. Depending on your version of Zoom, you might see the live transcript closed captioning icon. If not, look for the more ... and choose show subtitles. Or you could do the same and choose hide subtitles if you want to turn them off. If you're new to All Brains Belong, welcome. We are here to support the health and belonging of people with all types of brains, and we do that in lots of different ways, including Brain Club. You are invited to be part of what we're doing, be part of our community. Brain Club is our education program for purposes of demonstrating All Brains Belong's approach to neuro-inclusive culture, for the purpose of shifting broader community awareness of the issues of concern and importance to our community. It's also a place where we broker alliances with other communities and promote new ways of thinking and being. The idea is that what you see here, if it clicks for you and you think it might be helpful, we ask you to carry it forward, and that's how culture change happens. Everyone is welcome at Brain Club. Brain Club is not an affinity space. Everyone's welcome here. Brain Club's for neurodivergent people, people who support neurodivergent people, people who are exploring their neuroidentity, and anyone with any type of brain who wants to learn about neuro-inclusive culture. There are multiple right ways to participate here at Brain Club. You can have your video on or off. Even if it's on, we don't expect anything of you. Feel free to walk or move or fidget or stim or eat or take breaks or anything else that needs doing. During our presentation today, you're welcome to use the chat. If we have time for discussion afterwards, you can use mouth words or chat. There's never any pressure to communicate during Brain Club, though. Observation is a completely valid form of participation. Brain Club has an intentionally created culture. If you're new to Brain Club, here are some of the things that you will likely notice. So first off, this is for education purposes only. So the way we facilitate it is that it's not for medical or mental health advice. It's not a support group or a place to make individualized requests. We keep the focus on bright spotting, especially with a loaded topic like employment, which we'll speak more about in a minute. Employment can be really dysregulating. Employment has been traumatic for lots of people. And remembering that this is a place where we broker alliances, when we do criticize what gets in the way of people getting their needs met, we criticize systems. We don't criticize people. We don't blame or shame or bash groups of people, especially those who come to learn. So we ask you to try that on. What we do here at Brain Club is we are modeling new ways of being in community, and we listen to presenter stories. And for many, this is a way to feel less alone. If it's your first time at Brain Club, keep coming back. It might take a couple times to figure out the space and how we facilitate it. And we recommend observing the first time or two that you're here, as he's going to put some frequently asked questions in the chat. Thank you to everyone who supports Brain Club, who makes it possible for us to be here week after week, providing content about neuro-inclusive culture. One quick announcement. If you haven't seen it yet, Brain Club is now a podcast. So Brain Club, the podcast, new episodes are released the second and fourth Friday of the month. And so next Friday, this Brain Club will become a podcast. There's not always a one-to-one correspondence of between the Tuesday Brain Club and what becomes a podcast, but this one has some alignment. One more announcement is that on Tuesday, April 14th, is our 5th annual Shifting the Autism Narrative, the Impact of Stigma on Health. This is a webinar that we give every April, looking at the role of the healthcare system in driving and perpetuating stigma and what we can do instead. And here we are. We are continuing our Understanding the Nervous System theme of Brain Club. I'll introduce you to our topic in just a minute, but next week is a book chat on the book Anchored by Deb Dana. Lizzie's going to put a link in the chat. Also, March Brain Club is on masking. March Brain Club is officially open for registration. All right, so our topic, dysregulation at work. As I mentioned before, employment-focused brain clubs can be really hard. A lot of our community has experienced significant trauma related to work. And so it's not uncommon that, when we hear anybody talk about anything about work, it can really be activating to the nervous system. So we just want to give you permission to take care of yourselves. If you need to take breaks, if you need to, whatever you need to soothe your nervous system. We're going to have some brief background content. We're going to watch our discussion with Annie Crow, and then hopefully have time for a brief discussion to follow. What you're going to hear a lot about tonight relates to navigating ableism and, when our nervous systems are navigating work, the toll of workplaces that are built around neuronormativity, that one size fits all, and the discriminatory belief that it is superior to be, quote, abled, which can be intentional or unintentional and is often a missing piece of social justice conversations. So when we think about workplaces that are built around neuronormativity and built around, Sierra, would you be able to let people in from the waiting room?
Yep, I'm on it.
Awesome. So when we think about inaccessible workplace environments that are, there's a lot of systemic bias and intersectional harm when people are marginalized for multiple aspects of identity. So what we're going to be looking at is some of the reasons why many neurodivergent people struggle in workplaces and why many aspects of workplaces are dysregulating, and what shifts are possible, both collectively and internally. Because the thing about ableism is often it is internalized in the narratives that we take on from growing up in a world where we are taught that it is, quote, superior to be able to do a range of things. That really, we all have different brains and different bodies, and we all have different ways and different needs, different ways of doing things and different things we need. But that's not the narrative that most of us grow up with. So the other thing you'll hear a lot about tonight is references to autistic burnout in this article by Raymaker et al., which I think the title of which is really descriptive, having all your internal resources exhausted beyond measure and being left with no cleanup crew. Autistic burnout is common. Autistic burnout is a condition commonly experienced by neurodivergent people of all ages, characterized by three things: mental and physical exhaustion, loss of tolerance to stimuli, and loss of skills. Actually, Lizzie, if you could, at some point tonight, if you could find the autistic burnout entry from the digital resource library that has the glossary and the infographic and the recording, that might be helpful for people for whom this is a new term. So with that, I'd love to tell you about our presenter. Annie Crow is a neurodivergent advocate, speaker, and accessibility consultant specializing in neurodiversity at work and inclusive leadership. She's the founder of NeuroAccess and the host of Neurodiversity, the Future of Work podcast. Annie helps organizations break down systemic barriers and create workplaces where neurodivergent, disabled, and chronically ill employees can thrive. Annie has a background in law, government, and leadership, and brings a unique perspective of self-advocacy, workplace accessibility, and the future of work. She also runs the Neuro Access Network, supporting neurodivergent professionals in navigating work on their own terms. And so with that, I'm going to play our video. Actually, one more thing I want to say. In order to protect Brain Club culture, we really try while we're watching an asynchronous presentation or panel, really try to center the presenter or panelists, especially because presenters are often making themselves vulnerable and sharing their stories. So while we listen, we treat the chat as equivalent to mouth words, like what we would say while someone else is talking. So we ask that you use the chat intentionally, thoughtfully, and in a way that keeps the focus on our presenter. Thank you, and I will start our recording. Here we go.
Thank you for having me, Mel. I'm love talking to you and picking your brilliant brain and helping our community in any way possible.
Right back at you. So, we started this conversation when you interviewed me for your podcast. Princess and the Pea will link in the chat, which is an amazing resource, an amazing community. So we started talking about neuroimmune health and burnout and the relationship, the circular relationship, right, of burnout and employment. So I wonder for you, and based on your own personal experience and the clients you work with, I'd love to hear what you'd say about that. And we'd also love to hear more about you and the work you do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Please do pull me back on track if I digress, because I tend to do that even more when I'm sick. But anyway, so basically, burnout, what I do, so it's interesting. The space that I work in is heavily dominated by mostly allied health professionals, so psychologists, dietitians, physios, that sort of thing, occupational therapists, speech pathologists. And the reason for that here in Australia, at least, is that they tend to be the people who get referred. They tend to be the people that autistic people get sent to for help. And so I'm a very unique person in this space because my background's human rights law. I've spent the last decade working both in private practice and for the Australian government in the national sort of security space. And I have had so much of my own health journey, lots of complex health problems, all the things as we have. And it took me years of seeing every specialist under the sun and trying to advocate for my own healthcare and, being able to actually maintain employment while dealing with complex health and disability. And I never got the proper labels until I was in my late 20s. And so really it was a big shift for me. It's many years ago now, but I sort of thought, well, this is ridiculous that it took so long for people to put the pieces together and get to the core at what my struggles were. And then it was a big shock to me because I thought things would get better. When I found out I was autistic and ADHD and neurodivergent, I thought, this is great. Finally, I'm going to be able to have my access needs met because I'll be able to walk into any office, any employer, any doctor, anything and say, well, I'm autistic. And they're going to just naturally, maybe not employment so much, but healthcare you'd expect, right, would just naturally know that I had certain things that needed to be adapted, including sensory needs and different communication. And that was absolutely not the case at all. And so I did try initially to persevere in my more traditional employment. And, I disclosed at work and they were very kind and supportive. But the translation beyond being accepting and, tokenistic on the front, very well meaning, was just not there. They wouldn't respect my wishes for, limited phone calls. This was early COVID, so work from home was becoming normal. And so really it was a big tipping point for me to say, well, that's it. I'm going to start advocating and speaking out. And it just kind of skyrocketed. I've only been doing this for about 15 months now. And the minute I started talking publicly about my own experience, I was inundated with people from all around the world, and still to this day get multiple messages a day. It's very overwhelming, sharing so many shared lived experiences of burnout and discrimination and just inaccessible healthcare, inaccessible employment. And so now I consult. So I consult government and I consult organizations and health professionals that want to become more neuroaffirming and accessible. And I also coach neurodivergent, mostly adults, but also I've recently been getting a lot more parents reaching out, especially in the eating disorder space, which is one of my little niches. I started a not-for-profit last year on eating disorders, but that's another topic. And so basically I sort of consider myself, I suppose, I call myself a neurodivergent empowerment coach, but to me, what that really means is focusing on we're a group of people, like most minorities, that are oppressed and are discriminated against and have access needs. And so my form of empowerment is helping people self-advocate, whether that's at work or in healthcare or education, to have their needs met. And the biggest barrier there I find with a lot of my clients is that, it's so great when we've finally got the label and the language. See, he wants a treat. Sit down. We've finally got the label and the language, but then we're still limited by a society that has such limited beliefs. I was just thinking yesterday, I was interviewed on national television here in December on a piece on social media and autism and ADHD. And they used me as the segue from I think it was a psychiatrist or a researcher, saying that there was so much misinformation on TikTok and Instagram and stuff. And me basically saying, yeah, but is it really a problem if it's helping people like actually go and seek help and find out about themselves? But then I sort of thought to myself, I've just been reflecting recently, and I'm like, I think the issue here is actually that, and I'm not poo-pooing professionals or anything like that, but I think we need to be quite critical of, and this is why I love Mel's work so much, because Mel's done the work, and Mel and her team have really unpacked their own biases and the system that they were, trained in, which is sadly quite rare. And I promise I have a point. I think the issue isn't that there's a lack of, misinformation. I think the issue is that most of the professionals have such a limited view of what it is to be autistic, ADHD, neurodivergent. And so when they see stuff on social media where you've got hundreds of autistic people sharing their lived experience and them looking at that and going, well, that's not in the DSM, so that's inaccurate. Is it? Or is the DSM limited? And this is very relevant for employment and burnout and access, because when I help, sadly, so many adults who are getting really blatantly discriminated against at work, whether they're losing their jobs or getting put on performance reviews or all of those sort of things, where they're going into work and saying, I have these access needs, and work is saying, well, that's not autism, or having these very limited beliefs on, that autistic people just need like less eye contact and no bright lights, which we all know is the most limited view you could possibly have of our access needs. So really, what I help people do is find the language and articulate what they truly need to have meaningful access to employment, so that they're not in perpetual burnout, which is such a we call it autistic burnout for a reason. Our community is constantly in burnout from basically existing in a world that refuses to accommodate us. And so my business, my consulting firm, is called Neuro Access. And the point of that is that, aligned with the social model of disability, for me, it's really about, we need to shift this perspective and really focus on these environments and make the people in positions of power and privilege take responsibility in helping us access employment, healthcare, you name it, in a nutshell. Yeah, I'm a busy person and I could use more help. So anyone who wants to advocate in this space, do reach out. I sort of try to mentor some people to get more of us out there. We need so many more voices.
Amen to that. And I just popped some links in the chat, Annie's podcast, as well as the website for Neuro Access. So a lot of times, people will say, all right, so now I know burnout's a thing. Now what? And I say, there's no magic, right? You have to, there really needs to be some shifts in how much you're draining your battery versus how much you're charging your battery. And employment is a huge drain on battery. And it's almost like, so to be able to access one's cortex, have the executive functioning skills required to self-advocate, that you don't have access to that. You're just drowning.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, and that's the thing, I think another problem that I see really often is that, we are perpetually in burnout, or we recover and then go back into burnout. And so many people get confused by that, because they're like, well, I've made changes and I'm trying to find that balance and put things in place to prevent this happening. But the problem is that no matter how hard we try, on an individual level, we're still constantly butting heads with this system that remains inaccessible. Like, you could have the most amazing employer, the most neuroaffirming employer, who truly, if not gets neurodivergence, is at least willing to listen and learn and treats you as the expert that you are on your own neurosystem, you know, and you'll still be up against so many challenges. So, you know, I constantly try to help people separate individual responsibility from systemic. And it's not to say that we don't all have individual responsibility, because we do, but unfortunately, so many of our community have, you know, really internalized a lot of this ableism and blame ourselves for our lack of access. And we blame ourselves for our inability to prevent burnout and to exist in this world. Anyway, so really, I sort of work overtime in trying to help people understand that it's so much bigger than the individual. And the reason I do that is because it's really at the core of being able to advocate for ourselves and to have our needs met, is that when you're trying to advocate for your rights coming from a place of shame and internalized ableism, it's so much harder than knowing that you can speak out and know that it's not on you. And so much of what we deal with in society around mental health and well-being is put on the individual, you know, whether that's weight or mental health in general. It's all pushed back on the individual, rather than acknowledging that there is so many external factors that are at play here. And, you know, like, for instance, Mel and I both shudder at the word resilience, because resilience is like one of the most common things we hear. We want to build resilience in people. People don't lack resilience. I'm going to tell you, autistic people are some of the most bloody resilient people I've ever met. Is my Aussie coming out? Bloody. Because we're constantly knocked down and we still get up. Like, it's not a resilience issue. It's an access issue. It's discrimination, it's oppression. And these are big words, right? And they sound very fancy and complex, and they are. But to be able to translate that into everyday language of what does that actually mean? Well, what that means is that you not allowing me to make these small changes around how I communicate, how I show up, the hours I work, where I work from, all of those things directly impact my health and well-being and ability to maintain employment. And that is like taking big picture oppression, discrimination, ableism into very tangible actions. And that's really some of the hardest things to do, because, you know, any minority group finds it challenging to talk about how they're struggling. And we talk about like white fragility, you know, white people don't like hearing how we're racist. Most of us are, like, even if we've done a lot of work to unpack that. And it's similar in ableism. It's similar in all minority groups. Having to talk to your oppressor about how they are playing a part, consciously or not, in those systems of oppression is so challenging. And when you add to that, being a person who has a completely different way of communicating, which causes so much anxiety and so much stress on our already overstressed nervous system, it's a health crisis waiting to happen, if not continuously happening, to no surprise. Anyway, I'll get off my horse.
And yes, all of that. And I think that when you're in the thick of it, because of that narrative that's been so over rehearsed of you are the problem, you are defective, that makes it all the more challenging. So you, not only is the onus on you to advocate for your rights to your oppressor, but you think it's your fault.
Yep, exactly. Exactly, which just disempowers you and takes away any chance at getting your needs met and any, you know, right that you have. Because this is, you know, and I'm a lawyer and human rights is my thing. And, you know, I think the thing that I see a lot in this space, especially because it's dominated by psychologists and psychiatrists who are obviously the autism experts, is that so many of them don't have any education in social systems, laws, frameworks, government, things that directly impact our health and well-being. And so really, this is, again, why I love Mel and her work and the people in our community who have who have really expanded their views from a very limited and narrow mindset that it is the product of the systems that we're in. Like, I'm not blaming health professionals at all or employers. You know, we get trained and we get taught what we know, but it's also about taking responsibility and learning these bigger systems. I was just listening. I got a message yesterday from one of the people that just recently took my masterclass in eating disorders and supporting autistic people. And she sent me some screenshots of a newsletter that she got from her child's kindergarten, which is like preschool, daycare, whatever. And they basically wrote this big piece on, there's these two academics in Queensland here in Australia that wrote a book last year called Becoming Autistic. And just for anyone who doesn't know, when you hear that title, I don't know about you, but I thought to myself, oh, that's great. This is going to be about embracing your autistic identity, and it's going to be so empowering. No, it's not. They literally talk about how technology is causing autism. It's so bad. I literally was up till 2 a.m. unpacking the horribleness that is this thing. And they talk about how, like, theory of mind. I'm like, do you not know about the double empathy problem? It's been over a decade now. Really? How are you academics and you don't understand double empathy and autism? Anyway, I'm going on a rant. But my point is that these are the people who are influencing our system, who are seen as the experts, and who are, you know, so much of our access is relied on this. Even in the legal system, I actually was in a car accident myself in my early 20s, and I had to go through our legal system to get a third-party insurance claim. And I'm a lawyer, so, you know, I figured I'd have a hand up, even though I have no experience in personal injury law. But my neurodivergence was actively used against me in every step of the way in this lawsuit. And I'm going to use this as an example because I think it's really translatable to employment as well, in burnout and all of the things. But one of the things that happened was when I was not working for a period and really struggling, sit down, Moose, I was so burnt out, yet so bored. And I talk a lot about bore out in my work. And that's a big part of autistic burnout as well. But anyway, and they basically said to me, you know, oh, you're lying because I made this Instagram account. It was like a makeup thing. I was obsessed with makeup for a period. It was like my only way of coping. But like my way of existing in the world was continuously attacked. And because I was putting like my highlight reel online, which was, you know, I'd put makeup on my face maybe once a fortnight when I had an ounce of energy, and I'd put a post online. To them, they're like, oh, you look like you're doing well. And again, this isn't like, so much of this is invisible and hard to articulate, right? But what I'm trying to get at is so much of this comes down to what is our assumed knowledge of neurodivergence and how does that impact our ability to have our needs met? So when we go into work and say things like, I need to be able to work flexibly, and what does that look like and why? We're met with things like, well, you know, I've done some research since you disclosed, and I know that the A, B, and C are common things that autistic people need at work, and this isn't one of them. What? Like, this is at the core of our issue, because autistic people, as most of you know, if you're listening, we're very diverse within our own community and our needs are very different. And so if you're going off this cookie cutter research that is so limited and so much focused on, you know, what they call profound autism, which is not a thing in my opinion, but is often really focused on autistic people with intellectual disability, which majority of the workforce, because we're so not in the workforce already because of discrimination and such, underemployed, all of those things.
I have a question, but I could have impulse controlled to keep my hand down.
Dive in.
No, go for it. Finish. Go.
No, so, well, I mean, the thing is that, oh, was that me?
I have no idea,
that?
But that's incredible. Where did that come
sorry,
from?
I bumped I've got this audio setup thing. It's got sound effects. Anyway, so our understanding, and, you know, if you look at things like high functioning autism, basically people say that we're not really that autistic or we don't really have access needs. It's rubbish, because most of us just have the ability to hide these problems.
Which is
And
why
that just
functioning
leads to more
labels
problems.
are
Harmful.
Functioning labels
So
are terrible.
harmful.
Most of us have, just the fluctuating capacity.
Yeah, dynamic disability for a reason. And I don't even like support. So a lot of people say, oh, don't say high-low functioning, just say high-low support needs. And I'm like, that's also kind of quite limiting because our support needs fluctuate depending on our environment and there's so many different factors.
Around the time of my autism diagnosis, I lost the ability to motor plan brushing my teeth, and I couldn't get words out for a prolonged period of time.
Yeah, but you're high functioning.
It's a motor disability.
Also, I think it's really important to acknowledge that people who either are gifted or even just don't have a co-occurring intellectual disability have a very unique set of challenges. And this is the community that face, higher rates of masking, higher rates of suicide. Giftedness is more than intellect. You can be creatively gifted, intuitively, all of those things. Basically, what it means is that your giftedness isn't recognized and your disability isn't supported. So you're in this phase of I'm not having my support needs met as a disabled person, but I'm also not getting recognized for some of the talents and skills that I do have. So it's a very, go Mel.
But also, I'd also say is that when we speak of internalized ableism, this population, one of the many challenges this population faces is that when it comes to asynchronous development or so-called scattered skills. So here I am, I'm a kid who does well at school, does maybe really well at school, but I math is holy anyway, so I'm oh, I hope they don't find out.
Yeah,
so
it's huge amounts of imposter syndrome, rejection sensitivity. Yeah, absolutely. I use it. So
the other piece that I just want to circle back around, because I don't trust my ability to remember this.
Do it.
So I think, and maybe this is just my cynicism, I am concerned that often when people are in a place for advocating for their rights at work, I don't see many people prosper because these environments are just so toxic. Whereas if there was already an environment where employees' individual thriving was prioritized, you wouldn't have to evoke your legal rights. Just be able to have a conversation, because that's just how that goes. Which is why, talking about, I think unfortunately are in places where they have to invoke their legal rights. And why we talk about inclusion here is that, not only are at least 1 in 5 people neurodivergent, but often they don't know. So employers don't know, and the people don't know, which is why creating environments where people with all types of brains can thrive using principles of universal design, etc., it is so much better than waiting for people to have to fight. And what do you think about that comment?
Oh, I love that so much. Honestly, it's at the core of what I do. So, I am a human rights lawyer, but I no longer practice discrimination and human rights law per se. And in the suicide prevention space, they call suicide prevention has upstream and downstream. So downstream is where you're in crisis and you're calling emergency services, and upstream is let's do stuff that prevents you getting to that point. And so for my job, I see myself as an upstream human rights lawyer. So, and that's why I love talking about things like inclusion and access and universal design. How can we put things in place so we don't get to a point where we're having to go to court, where we're having to go to the Human Rights Commission, where we're having to fight for our basic rights? Because usually by that point, things are so toxic and it's so hard to come back from. And so I have a lot of my clients will come to me where they're in this middle phase of they're not quite at the stage where they're seeking, illegal action, but they're also not at the stage of, this nirvana that we're all keep striving for. And so it's this really fine balance of trying to work with employers who often really do mean well, but we have this very, deficit-based view and sort of I don't know what the word for it is, but like tokenistic box ticking that, everyone starts to get their back up and they're like, oh, I don't want to like do anything wrong and I want to meet my legal obligations as an employer, but I also like don't want to deal with this stuff because it's taking away from the work I like doing or should be doing or whatever you want to put in there. And so it becomes very quickly can go downhill if you're not, getting the right support or if you're just unlucky to have a not great employer. So really what I'm trying to do in my own work is very much focusing on how can we get employers to start thinking about this stuff far before we have to get labels or disclose or talk about our specific struggles, because that's one, not very empowering, and two, does raise all these barriers of, preconceived stigma, stereotypes, all the challenges that we constantly have to deal with when we're barely like struggling to exist to begin with, and it's all put on us as the individual to advocate for. So I am just like, that comment was gold. I'm all about that life.
I could talk to you all day. Can you talk about bore out?
Bore out, yeah. So bore out is one of my passions. So in burnout, when you hear people talking about autistic burnout, a lot of the time we'll talk about, pulling back on demands and really just trying to reset that sort of the pressure on our nervous system and such to come out of the burnout. But often what happens for most of the people I support is that we tend to struggle with a thing called bore out. So when you pull back on everything, there's this, sort of element of guilt, I guess, and shame around feeling like you can't do anything because you can't do these basic things like keep attending work or whatever. You shouldn't be able to do anything that you love. You shouldn't be able to hyper focus on your special interest or passion or whatever you want to call it, because you can't do the other stuff, when actually that can be a real remedy for us. So focusing, not getting into bore out as well, which is essentially, not being bored because you're not doing anything. Like you're pulling back so much from the demands at life that you're not able to do what is really interesting and fulfilling for you. And so really I try to talk about with my clients who are in burnout recovery, really trying to balance that, pulling back on demands while also filling up your cup, replenishing your spoons. And for a lot of autistic people, that is leaning into your special interests, that is giving yourself permission to still do the things that do fill you up, even though to an outsider, what that can look like often, and this really is quite common for parents or spouses or whatever, is that they're like, oh, well, you can't work, but you can spend all day doing ABC. Like, that's bullshit. That's rubbish. Like, no, you're missing the point. Right? Go on, Mel.
Right. I mean, what I would add to this is like just from a brain science standpoint. So autistic and ADHD brains are dopamine bound brains. We need dopamine literally for everything. Like dopamine feels good to everybody, but we need dopamine.
We need it.
We need it, not just for like, motivation, engagement, attention. We need it for like motor function and coordination and starting and stopping an activity, starting and stopping an idea. And so when you are not getting enough dopamine, whether because, as you said, you're not doing something interesting, you're not moving, or you're not eating protein and water, which gets very circular because if you have interoception processing differences, you may not be hungry or thirsty, or from an executive functioning situation, it may be difficult to access those things, or from a financial perspective, given that autistic people are 2.5 to 4 times more likely to be unemployed, less likely to be able to, that's another barrier to accessing sufficient protein to make enough dopamine. Anyway, it gets like very, very circular.
And the ADHD tax and, not being able to manage your finances, which is a huge part of just being able to have money regardless of employment and income.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what we talk about with our medical patients here is part of burnout recovery is like thinking about like dosing and frequency, intensity of your experiences. So like if it fills my cup to interact with you, it does not mean I should interact with you for 3 hours.
Yes.
Even though that often is what happens, but then I like can't talk after that. Like I probably should, set an alarm or something.
Great conversation. I think for many of us, workplaces have been shamed by shame, exclusion, survival mode. But I think naming that can be the first step, right? And so even if all we can do right now is shift our own expectations or find words for our experiences. So I'm very grateful to Annie for sharing her insight, her advocacy, and expertise to help us imagine what a different kind of workplace can be. I'd love to just open this up for a few minutes if anybody would like to share what is something you're taking away from this conversation. Oh, hi, Sierra.
Hi. Um, I loved this conversation. I I really liked I think it was a comment Alvar put in the chat about like n being very resilient and not the goal of not having to rely on resilience all the time and not having to rely on that to get through day to day. And to me, that really tied into the idea of like we might not present as others present, and that can make us be dismissed more often when burnout looks like bore out and people might not believe that we're in burnout. I think that happens with pain a lot of times. Pain presentation looks really, really different. And somebody who's in chronic pain all the time is going to present really differently. And then especially when we have like a whole lifetime of being used to being overworked and being in and out of burnout. It's very easy for us to learn to kind of push those down and push some of that kind of push some of that interoception and other stuff down and just how it, I guess just like yeah of course it's going to be of course people aren't going to believe us because we've been told for most of our lives often to not show what we're feeling, to not or that what we're feeling isn't true or right. And it's so amazing and important to like relearn some of those things. And I think it's really exciting when people can relearn those things, and relearn interoception and trust in ourselves and having that community to like hear from other people and to get that validation. That's the thing that makes that possible.
Absolutely. We're learning and unlearning together because I think it's just I think it's very difficult, if not impossible, to do this kind of in learning by yourself. Thanks, Sierra. And then Kirk, then we're gonna wrap up. Oh, Anna, you might be muted. There you
I
go.
am. And I'll try to be quick. That was just so amazing to me. I have to say, like, I can't even, like, I guess it did strike something I think about a lot, and I'll try to be super quick. Like, I think it's so hard, especially in this day that we're living in, and I don't want to go too far down. I know the political world and climate, but when you have people that are like trying to eradicate and thinking that, like, if you if you are autistic, I mean, just there's so much that makes me so sad because it doesn't celebrate anything about amazing brains, and it's just trying to like almost like um, straight and narrow what everybody should be like. And I think it must be even extra hard to live in this kind of day and climate for sure. And it also made me think like something that we heard, a couple weeks ago. It's like, isn't it just all about like meeting people where they are and not that's what I just think about. Like you meet people where they are, and then my last thought, and maybe for another time, is that I just wonder if like, you get that message that you work because you need to make money. It doesn't have to be fun or enjoyable. But this made me think about like how important it is, like maybe to find passion in your work so that when you're because there's so much already with burnout and all these things that, but if you can go back to something that moves you and brings you to a place that you can connect with, then finding a job that must, I think that just adds to like how you look for your place in the community and what kind of job you decide that resonates with who you are. So I have so much more to say. That was just an amazing thing. And I wish we could be on all night, but I will stop there. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm gonna be I'm gonna see if I can quickly find a yeah, I found it. This is a brain club from February 2024 about redefining work. And people talk about, all right, if I have a dopamine bound brain, I need to get dopamine from work. If I can't get it from my work, because a lot of us don't have, the privilege to do work that brings us dopamine, but where am I going to get my dopamine? Like what is that going to look like? How do I build that into my life? Um, thank you, Anne. Kirk?
Quick as well, to kind of dovetail off that. Yeah, I could talk about this all night. Um, uh, I try myself not to have like a nihilistic or a basically jaded view of advocation in the workplace because from from the from my basic standpoint, it comes down to the the sort of effects of late stage capitalism. I mean, I try not to think about it from that perception, but we in some workplaces we are just essentially a number, and I've been lucky to find spaces where I have been seen as, a living, breathing, like dynamic individual, but a lot of it does come down to my productivity. And to speak on that, the frame of productivity that's expected, that's seen through a very, static lens. So to sort of change these workplaces, we have to change our perception of what each individual brings to the table. And I've read enough books on Marxism and things of that nature where it really kind of scares me, but I'm willing, I stepped into the field that I work in, and I've stepped into these spaces to not only, share my story, but to try to promote this sort of paradigm shift that individuals like us so desperately need.
Thank you, Kirk. And absolutely, I think that it's really important for everyone to hear that you have value by being a person. You have value by being you. It doesn't matter what you do, what you produce, whether or not you work, and whether you, whatever it is that you are doing. And I think we try to like speak to that at Brain Club because I think for some people this is the first time they're hearing it. Fiona, and then we're going to wrap up.
Hi.
Hey.
First time speaking up. Well, probably it's actually one question and then one comment question. I think in the conversation right at the start, mention of neuroimmune responses, and that's not a term I'm familiar with.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the chat. So
Neuroimmune health. Yeah.
Yeah, neuroimmune, hold on, there we go. Neuroimmune refers to the nervous system and the immune system and the ways in which they interact. And autistic and ADHD people often suffer from a constellation of neuroimmune conditions that are interconnected. And so that website has some information about that.
Yeah. I am familiar with the everything's connected to everything.
Oh, awesome. That's awesome.
Have the neuroimmune health label on that. Yeah, I work a lot and late identified ND person who's now going, oh, my whole career has been focused around the children who weren't fitting in, and now I know why, oh, what's different about that kid? How can I help them? I'm sure it's pretty global, but here in Australia, there's just so much lack. I made a comment before, lack of understanding that it's a basic right to access the needs, like the accessibility and accommodations and adjustments. And I just don't know, how do we begin to, in workplaces, in schools, in all of the systems, answer the but it costs too much. Our system, we like, schools are constantly going, we know these kids need more, but we don't have the funds, we don't have the resources, and the burden on the parents,
I would push back on that. I would push back on that because neuro inclusion is free. Neuro inclusion relates to the way you see the world. It's the paradigm that you operate in. If you believe that we all have different brains and different brains have different needs, that is free. And if you believe that, everything else that follows, everyday human interactions will all be different. If you don't believe that, you will think that you have to spend a bunch of time to, and a bunch of money to hire some behavioral interventionist. Kids don't need that. They need to be thought of as competent human beings who deserve a path to connection and self-actualization. That's what I
I
would say
think
to
I'm
that.
gonna write out that, because you've just bam, there it is. I'm gonna write out that quote and start just sending it to all the parents that I, work with, and all, because it's that, but we don't have enough funding to employ the aid that the kid needs. I'm like, but the teacher just needs to recognize this kid needs to move, or it's
Right.
that it's
It's free to
exactly
move. It's
what
free to
she
move.
said in about workplaces too. Actually, a lot of the accommodations are fairly small,
Yes.
and as
Yes.
you say, free.
Yes.
They just require a neuro-inclusive understanding of
Yes.
of working together and
That's right.
acknowledging difference.
That's exactly right. Well, thank you for the work that you do in advocating. And thank
And
you
I
to everyone for
kind of
being
am with Kirk. Oh, sorry, ADHD interrupt the brain. I'm kind of with Kirk of the bit of, you can get really jaded.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what part of being here is, that actually we're not alone. We're actually we're working together. We understand. We get it.
That's right. And that's what Brain Club's all about. It's about coming to be with other people who are trying to reimagine life. And we have, some of us have more or less agency to make, big changes, but this is like just even to make a shift of like, it's not just me. I'm not making this up. There are other people who see the world as I do, which for me, sometimes when I'm in environments that are unsafe, I at least having a narrative shift of like, it's not actually wrong with the way I'm seeing the world, and there are people out there that I get to return to. Well, thanks, Connie. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're all here, and we look forward to seeing you next week for our book chat on Anchored. Anchored is about strategies for understanding the autonomic nervous system and learning to work with your autonomic nervous system, which is one of your defense mechanisms as you move through the world. It's one of the systems that protect you, that help you sort out safe from not safe. And a lot of times we when things happen, we don't understand that these are automatic, involuntary responses to an unsafe environment. So we look forward to digging into that next week with you all. Thanks, everyone. Good night.